And namaskar to everyone. I'm Rakhi, representing causes from the periphery, and it's an overwhelming honor to welcome you all to this lecture on Western Marxism and showcase Marxism, conflict or cooperation. We are truly blessed to be in the presence of Professor Sobhanlal Datta Gupta, a philosopher of rare brilliance, Dutch barrier of Marxist thought, and one of the most distinguished minds of our time. His life's work is not merely academic, it is a moral and intellectual compass for all who seek to understand and transform the world. Professor Dattagupta's scholarships has shaped generations. His profound engagement with Rosa Luxemburg, Gramsci, and Bukharin have shaped the gold standard in Marxist political thought. His focus Comintern and the Destiny of Communism in India redefines our understanding of revolutionary possibilities. As an editor and public intellectual, he has gifted us volumes like Marx and and Marxist in the time. Equally monumental are his Bengali books, সমাজ মস্তব্ধ সমকাল যশ রাষ্ট্রচিন্তা and Rosa Luxemburgের রাজনৈতিক ভাবনা text that brings the fire of revolutionary theory into the heart of the Bengali public shop. His very presence today is a moment of history for us. Now I request you, sir, to say something for today's topic. Up to you, sir. Hello,
Hello.
sir. Am I audible?
No, actually, your voice is not audible very clearly. Anyway, should I start now? Hello. Am I? Can you
Yes,
hear
sir.
me?
Yes, sir.
So should I start now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now you first tell me one thing. That is, since this is a Google Meet, so what is the duration of the entire program? You just
Sir, usually our lectures are running for 1 to 1.5 an hour, including the question answer session.
yes. Yeah. Okay, then I think if it is a 90 minutes program, then I think I should speak for about, say, maximum up to 1 hour, and then there will be question answer. Is that okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay, okay. Now, first of all, I should thank the organizers. In fact, uh, the kind of initiative that you have taken for uh, say this kind of discussion. This is really very commendable, and these are in fact I was going through the flyers that you have sent me, and I found some of the most of them are related to history, but I found some of them really very interesting, and for me also, well, this can be very exciting, enriching sort of topics. Now, the topic that you have uh, requested me to speak on this evening, that is, it's a bit unusual, and I must admit that it's somewhat complex. So I do not know. I will try, but since this is I understand that this is a terrain, this is an area which is relatively uh, less known to our students, even to our teachers. Very few people know about it. Just a moment, just a moment. Sorry. Now, can you hear me?
Yes, sir, we can hear you.
Okay, okay, okay. Now, as I was telling you, this is a subject or this is an area that is the title itself is it may sound somewhat intriguing. That is Western Marxism and Soviet Marxism, uh, conflict or cooperation. Uh, the two words, Western Marxism and Soviet Marxism, they have one thing common, that is Marxism. But the two, say, concepts or the two wordings, Western Marxism and Soviet Marxism, well, one may ask a question: if Marxism is common to both the terms, Western Marxism and Soviet Marxism, then how is it that we are then using a sort of subtitle that is conflict or cooperation? That means there is a kind of tension between the two terms. Tension, uh, conflict, then a sort of, say, uh, antagonism. So, what is it all about? To understand this problem and the given time frame, and to make the things somewhat uh, easy for you, I have decided that I will say focus on three interrelated dimensions. First, let me give you a briefing on Soviet Marxism. What is meant by Soviet Marxism? Second, I will broadly give you an idea of what Western Marxism means. And third, what I will try to focus on is that I will try to establish a sort of linkage between Western Marxism and Soviet Marxism, and will try to examine this question: is it a relation of conflict? Is it a relation of cooperation? Or is it both? That is, conflict as well as cooperation. So, at these three levels, I will try to uh, examine this point. Now, before I do that, I would like to introduce two terms. They are philosophical terms. Maybe some of you have come across these terms in your books, but I know that these terms, although are quite frequently used in our books, in our writings, in our academic works, but the meaning is not clear to them. To that is, those who are readers, to them it's not clear. One term is ontology. The other term is called epistemology. What is meant by ontology and what is meant by epistemology? Ontology, it, it actually raises a crucial question, that is, which one is primary? Matter, or in philosophy it is called being or consciousness, objective world or subjectivity, consciousness. Which one is primary? This is a central question of ontology. I'm giving you just a very basic outline of what is meant. Because unless we are clear about this meaning of these two terms, we cannot follow the rest of what I will talk about. The other concept is epistemology. Epistemology, it raises again a very crucial question in philosophy. That is the world knowable? Can we know the world? Or there are many zones, many areas which are not known to us, which we cannot know. And to add one small point to uh, the understanding of this question. When we are saying that can we know the world, the question of how do we know it? That is, can we understand the world by using our reason, or reason has its limitations? We cannot know the everything that is all about us, the truths, the nature of reality, the real meaning of what we hear, what we see, what we observe, what we feel, what we imagine. So, can all these things be known by using our reason? Or reason has its limitations? So, this is the epistemological question. And as we will proceed, you will see that this tension between Western Marxism and Soviet Marxism, it essentially centers around these two questions, the ontological question and the epistemological question. With these preliminary words by way of introduction, let me now give you a quick, uh, you can call it sort of information, interpretation, both. That is, I will try to give you a very quick overview of what Soviet Marxism means and how Soviet Marxism, the word Soviet Marxism, it has been interpreted over the years. I'm raising this question for one simple reason. When we use the word Soviet Marxism, then common sense suggests that Soviet Marxism means this. These are the parameters of Soviet Marxism. These are the essential ingredients of Western. That is where, Soviet Marxism. That is Soviet Marxism, it means something homogeneous, something very integrated, and something universal. That is Soviet Marxism means this. But that is not uh, the real story. Soviet Marxism, it has been given two different types of interpretations. One kind of interpretation has been given in the past for many years. I will give you a very brief overview. That is, when the Soviet Union was in existence, that is from 1917 to 1991, at that time, Soviet, by Soviet Marxism, uh, what was meant was a kind of understanding which uh, gave us the impression that Soviet Marxism has a very integral core, and there is no difference in regard to the understanding of Soviet Marxism. That is, Soviet Marxism at that time in those years was normally identified with the official version provided by the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. That was the understanding. A very homogeneous, integrated understanding where there is no difference, everybody is unanimous, all Soviet people have accepted this understanding of Soviet Marxism. There is one single understanding of Soviet Marxism as provided by the Communist Party of Soviet Union, the official version. That was one understanding. But this understanding was never actually accepted uh, as the real understanding of Soviet Marxism by uh, academics, serious academics, serious scholars, especially those who specialized in, say, Russian studies, Soviet studies. They never accepted this version. What they argued was that within Soviet Union, especially in Russian academic circles. Right from the time of the Russian Revolution, there were many debates, many disputes, many differences, but they were never publicized. They were never brought into open by the official Soviet academic circles. And if one uh, wants to understand the uh, nature of this difference, these two different viewpoints, that one viewpoint, the official Soviet viewpoint, that is the version which recognizes no difference, no distinction, no tension on this question, that is Soviet Marxism. Everybody agrees uh, on this understanding. Now, and the other kind of version, as I've just stated, that is the version which is the Soviet version, which is official Soviet version, which was challenged by very serious academics. Now, if one wants to understand the difference between these two viewpoints, then I will refer to just certain books. For example, in 1981, from Moscow, a book came out, Philosophy in the USSR, Problems of Historical Materialism. In that book, actually, if you read the book, then you will have no idea of whether there was any debate, any dispute, any disagreement, any, say, dialogue within the Soviet academia among the Soviet philosophers. If you read the book, you'll get a very neat story that this is how philosophy, historical materialism, Marxism, they developed in Soviet Union, and all people agreed on this point. But I will now refer to certain books. Some of the books came out in, say, 19 in the 50s, but nobody paid, especially those who are interested in Marxism, nobody paid any attention to these books. I will mention just a few names. For example, one book, uh, just a moment, just the the name of the book is this book actually came out in the year 1958. It's a thick book. Uh, that is the name of the author is Gustav Wetter, Dialectical Materialism, Historical and Systematic uh, Study of Survey of Philosophy in the Soviet Union. It's a very thick book, originally written in German, but it was translated into English and came out in the year 1958. Gustav Wetter. I will first mention some of the books, then what is common to all these books, I will very briefly. This was one book. Then there came out, say, another book. That book came out in 1961. David Jurafsky, Soviet Marxism and Natural Science, 1917 to 1932. This book came out in 1961. Then a book, J.M. Bokhensky, Soviet Russian Dialectical Materialism. This book came out in the year 1963. Then another book that came out in 1975, T.J. Blackley edited, Themes in Soviet Philosophy, Selected Articles from Philosophical Encyclopedia. Then in 1991, came out another book, David Backhurst, uh, uh, Consciousness and Revolution in Soviet Philosophy. That is came out in 1991. Then in 1994, there came out a book written by a Dutch scholar, Evert van der Verde, Soviet Philosophy, The Ideology and the Handmaid. It came out in 1994. And finally, another book that came out in the year 2012, 2012, Why Yakut, The Suppression of Philosophy in the USSR in the 1920s and 1930s. Now, what is common to all these books? It is not possible for me to explain the details of each of the book. Time will not permit it. But I'm giving you just, I'm mentioning just one thing. That is, despite the, say, variations of themes, despite the different types of, say, emphasis in all these books, there is one thing common to all these 7 or 8 books which I have mentioned. And you will immediately find the contrast between the official Soviet version, which always said, which always tried to emphasize, which always tried to argue that, well, as I said, there is no point of difference, there is no debate. Everybody agrees on the line provided by the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. And that is the understanding. So there is no dispute, no difference. But if you read all these books, then you will find these scholars have very, I would say, uh, this is a very meticulous exercise they have made. That is, they have unearthed, they have looked into all sorts of Soviet sources. All of them are familiar with, that is, they read Russian, they know Russian, they have very good access to Russian and Soviet sources, and they present a completely different picture. What is the different picture? That in Soviet Union, after the Russian Revolution of 1917, there took place very serious debates. But, and that is a very interesting issue, but these debates ultimately, at one point, came to an end, or they were forced to come to an end. That is, originally the debates were there, heated exchanges were there, but, and it started happening broadly the beginning of the 1930s in Soviet Union. And what happened was that these debates ultimately fizzled out. These debates ultimately came to an end. And what happened was, ultimately, since the beginning of the 1930s, why it happened, how it happened, I will give you a broad idea. That since the beginning of the 1930s, in Soviet Union, quite rapidly, the academic scenario began to change. Debates, discussions, difference of opinion, all these gradually uh, began to be suppressed. Suppressed, and they eventually were replaced by that understanding. The understanding which I have already mentioned, that is a neat, integral, homogeneous understanding of Soviet Marxism. No difference, no dispute. There is one standard, unilinear understanding of Marxism, Marxist philosophy, and there is no other alternative voice in Soviet Union. That is what I would like to uh, highlight is this, that in Soviet Union, how it happened now, I will give you a, an idea of how it happened. But the point is this, that is in Soviet Union, initially, till the end of the 1920s, beginning of the 1930s, yes, there were differences, there were debates. But since the beginning of the 1930s, gradually these debates began to come to an end. It led to a kind of situation where no debate, no criticism, no discussion was allowed, and eventually a sort of homogeneous understanding of Soviet Marxism emerged. Now, I will very briefly mention how it happened. I will, for your convenience, I will actually place before you this whole story uh, in four different phases. Of course, very briefly. What are these four different phases? The first phase, uh, well, it started immediately after the Russian Revolution, and it emerged as, at that time, Lenin was very much alive, and Soviet Marxism, it initially, that is, in the aftermath of the revolution of 1917, Soviet Marxism emerged as a kind of area which witnessed a very serious academic battle between two schools of Marxism, between two schools of thought. Once, one school of thought, it was known as uh, mechanists. Mechanists. Sometimes they were called liquidationists. Why? I will explain. Mechanists or liquidationists. And the other school, it was known as the Hegelians. Now, why and what was the dispute all about? So, let me explain it first of all very briefly. Now, you to understand this dispute, to understand this scholarly debate, one has to keep in mind, and I think all of you here will be able to appreciate it or understand it. That is, we must understand one thing. Russian Revolution was a kind of revolution which was unprecedented in the history of mankind. A completely new order had emerged in Russia. A revolutionary order had been established. So, and this revolutionary order, well, it will put to an end. It was believed like this. It will put to an end exploitation, injustice, inequality, and so a new order will emerge. But how this new order will emerge, nobody had an idea. There was no blueprint of how this new order would be created, how this new order would emerge. But there was one thing common to all, say, academics, those who were revolutionaries, those who were engaged in the project of socialist construction. So there was tremendous enthusiasm in post-revolutionary Russia so far as the building of a new order was concerned. It was a challenge, a historic challenge, an unprecedented challenge, a challenge that was never faced by mankind. So, in this climate of revolutionary enthusiasm, a, a school emerged in Soviet Union, especially among the academics, revolutionaries. That is, those were actively engaged in the building of socialism. A school emerged, a kind of orientation developed that since we have to build up a new order, so whatever was pre-revolutionary, that has to be discarded, lock, stock, and barrel. Anything pre-revolutionary is inappropriate. Anything pre-revolutionary is not acceptable to us. Anything pre-revolutionary is actually counter-revolutionary. Anything pre-revolutionary is reactionary. Therefore, all pre-revolutionary ideas have to be rejected. And those who belong to this group, they uh, there are differences among them. I'm not going into that discussion here. But broadly speaking, I would say this school, which was known as liquidationists or mechanists. Well, why they were called liquidationists? Because their standard understanding was this: we have to liquidate all remnants of pre-revolutionary ideas in our academic circles. What is meant by that? They pointed out, these enthusiastic academics, they pointed out we have to reject the very notion of philosophy. Philosophy, it was created by, it was, it had emerged in pre-revolutionary days. Philosophy, initiated by Plato, Aristotle, they were not revolutionaries. Philosophy, as say developed by Kant, Hegel, and many others, they were not. They were actually uh, not, since they were not revolutionaries. So we have to reject all of them. That is, we have to liquidate all remnants of pre-revolutionary legacy. And we have to understand one thing, that is, and here you understand the relevance of why I explain these two terms, ontology and epistemology. They say, in our world, the world that we see, there is only one thing that is primary, that is real, that is true, that is matter, material world. Whatever we see, whatever we observe, whatever we touch, whatever things that we can measure, that is things which we can understand by using our sense organs. Only that world is real. So it is ontologically we believe in the primacy of being or the primacy of matter. Consciousness, that is secondary. Consciousness, or the world of so-called world of consciousness, that is secondary, and not only secondary, that is not important for us. And epistemologically, their position was this, that yes, the world we can understand, we can know, everything is knowable by using our senses. Beyond senses, beyond matter, nothing is real, nothing exists. That is why they were called liquidations or mechanics. Mechanics, why? Because just mechanically they tried to apply or understand the notion of matter or material. This position was actually adopted by, there were many scholars, many academics. One was a, a person, his name was Minin, Minin. Minin, and another was a lady, a very powerful, very scholar, very distinguished scholar. Her name was Axelrod. So Minin and Axelrod, they were the two key figures representing this school of, say, liquidationists or mechanics. As against them, there emerged another school. They also were revolutionaries, enthusiasts, uh, very good scholars. They also were seriously engaged in the project of socialist construction, but they differed with the mechanists or the liquidationists. They were broadly known as Hegelians, and the most important person uh, who actually represented this opposite school, his name was Abram Devorin, Devorin. Devorin was as a cult figure in those days, in the 1920s and the early 30s. Devorin argued that yes, we also very strongly believe that matter, material world, because that is Marxism. Marxism is opposed to idealism. Marxism is very strongly espouses the cause of materialism, and therefore we very strongly subscribe to the notion that matter is primary and consciousness is secondary. But our difference with Minin and Axelrod is this, that matter is primary, this is fine, but consciousness also has a very important role to play. And this idea of consciousness, this emphasis on consciousness, they tried to borrow from Hegel. And they pointed out that unless we uh, attach or give due importance to consciousness, we cannot understand the complexity of the material world. That is, when we understand the material world, the nature of the material world, the nature of truth, the nature of reality, the true meaning of reality, then of course we start off with matter. But ultimately, we also cannot deny the positive role, the creative role played by human consciousness. That is, we, by using our reason, by using our different faculties, we try to understand the world. So, matter is important, all right, but consciousness also is no less important. This is the primary difference between the mechanists and the. Sometimes they were known as Devorinites. Sometimes it was said it is the conflict between the liquidationists and the Devorinites. The Devorinites mean those who are the followers of Devorin. So this is the first phase. Then in the second phase, actually, uh, it started more or less. If we say that the first phase went on throughout the 20s, by the end of the 1920s, the second phase started. What was the second phase? In this conflict, this is a long, complex, and a very fascinating story. I'm not going into that, but I'm just giving you what happened and how the second phase started. The second phase started more or less by 1928 in this conflict between the Devorinites and the mechanists. Eventually, uh, it is the Devorinites who actually scored their victory. Who scored their victory in the sense that in this ideological battle, in this academic struggle between the two camps, the mechanists, that is Lenin, Axelrod, they were defeated. They were actually, uh, they lost their positions. Why I'm saying all these things? Because, and this is also by way of information, I should mention some of these things, just by way of information. But this is very important. That is, as I said, that after the Russian Revolution, uh, throughout the country, actually, uh, one central agenda of the Bolshevik Party, of the ruling party in Soviet Union was this: that we have to purge our academic institutions of those elements who actually are uh, belong or still stick to pre-revolutionary ideas, who are hesitant to take up the cause of revolution. That is, those who are suspects. Therefore, we should try to induct real revolutionaries in our revolutionaries in the sense uh, uh, those academics who are really convinced that of about the idea of socialism, who are actively engaged in the building of socialism, who play a proactive role in the establishment and furtherance of the cause of socialism. So we should drive out the, the old generation, and this new generation of academics, they should be inducted in our establishment. Now, to work out all these ideas, a number of institutions were established in Soviet Union. One institution was known as the Communist Academy. There was one institution, it was called, say, the Institute of Red Professors. So that was another kind of institution. Then Society of Militant Materialists. This kind of institutions, and they are all packed up with, say, academics, not just party members. They're all academics. So what? Why I'm saying all this thing? Because by 1928, all these institutions actually were purged of the followers of the mechanists or the liquidists. That is, the followers of Benin and Luxemburg, who were still there in this Communist Academy, Institute of Red Professors, etc. They actually became minority. And the followers of Devorin, they became the majority, and they took charge of all these institutions. So, by 1928 and the beginning of 1929, what happened was the Soviet academic establishments, the Soviet Academy of Sciences, they apparently, I mean, why I am using the word apparently I will now explain. That is, apparently they were now all under the control of Devorin, and thus Devorin school became victorious. But this apparent victory of the Orinocs, it was very short-lived. Very short-lived for the reason that immediately thereafter, by the by the year 1929, actually a major shift started taking place in Soviet academic establishments. But to understand this shift, we have to also understand another very important dimension of Soviet history. Because unless we know this history, we cannot understand why it happened or how it happened. That is, here again, I am cutting a long story short. In Soviet Union, Lenin died in the year 1924. And immediately after Lenin's death, there started a very serious power struggle within the Bolshevik Party. Till 1927, it was a struggle between Stalin and Leon Trotsky. And Joseph Stalin now emerged as the general secretary, a very, very powerful position in the Soviet Communist Party. In fact, the most powerful position. So Joseph Stalin, he became the general secretary and leader of the Soviet Communist Party. And in this power struggle between Trotsky and Stalin, well, Trotsky was defeated in 1927. He was hounded out of the Soviet Communist Party. That is a long story, different story. I'm not going into that. By 1929, another very powerful figure, very distinguished figure in the Soviet Communist Party, Bukharin, Nikolai Bukharin. So this up to 1927, it was a struggle between Stalin and Trotsky. After Trotsky's exit, now it became, I will not call it power struggle because Bukharin, frankly speaking, was not really vying for power, but it became an ideological struggle. One that is, ideologically, they were sharply opposed to each other. That is, Stalin and Bukharin, uh, in this ideological struggle. By 1929, Bukharin was defeated. Now, what was the main difference between Bukharin and, say, Stalin? And what was the main difference between Trotsky and Stalin? Again, to cut a long story short, Trotsky was considered as a kind of, say, ultra-left by Stalin and his followers, whereas Bukharin was considered as rather moderate. Bukharin was always in favor of a lenient line, not in favor of force, not in favor of coercion, etc., etc. So, in uh, in the But if we use typical, say, Soviet expressions which were popular at that time, then the struggle between Trotsky and Stalin, it was known as the struggle between a struggle of Stalin against ultra leftism, and the ideological struggle between Stalin and Bukharin, it was considered as a struggle of Stalin against right reformism. So right reformism represented by Bukharin and ultra leftism represented by Trotsky. And Stalin is fighting on two fronts. This was the position so far. By 1929, Bukharin was out. By 1927, Trotsky had already been out. So please keep this in mind, because you please look at the years I mentioned. I have just mentioned that this conflict between, say, uh, Axelrod, mechanists, and the Devorinites, it came to an end by 1928, and Devorin and his followers scored their victory, and apparently uh, it, it appeared that now it was a time for Devorin and his followers, but it did not happen. By 1929, something different started. Now, uh, what was that? To understand this point, we have to refer to a document, that is Joseph Stalin, on December 27, 1929. Stalin gave a speech, uh, and this speech actually uh, set the tone for years to come. This speech of Stalin, delivered on 27 December 1929, it was actually a speech delivered by Stalin to agrarian workers who were trained in Marxism. In this speech, Stalin warned against two things. One is that we have to fight against the right danger, as I said, right reform is danger, and we have to fight also against the ultra leftist danger. So that is the line set by Stalin. Why I'm saying so? Because by this time, that is by 1929, by beginning of the 1930s, apart from these two groups, that is liquidationists and Devorinites, there emerged a third group. This third group was actually a group of scholars, a group of Soviet philosophers, two very important names. Uh, they became almost iconic figures in Soviet Marxism. One was Mitin, Mitin, and the other name was Yudin, Yudin. So Mitin and Yudin, they emerged as a third front, as a third school, and they now pointed out that both the schools, that is Devorinians, that is Devorin and his followers, the liquidationists, that is Minin and Axelrod, both of them were wrong. Both of them, their viewpoints have to be discarded. They have to be rejected. And the new line, this new line was given by these two scholars, and there were many others, historians, philosophers, but these two names are very important. That is uh, Nitin and as I said, Yudin, Nitin and Yudin. And thereafter, as, as I say, uh, what happened was in 1931, on 25th January 1931, Central Committee of the Soviet Communist Party, it actually uh, adopted a resolution. That resolution was very, very important. Stalin's speech, followed by this resolution of the Central Committee of the Soviet Communist Party on 25th January. What was the resolution? In that resolution, it was very clearly stated that now, henceforth, all you just take note of the shift. Henceforth, all that will be discussed in Soviet philosophical circles, in Soviet Marxist circles. Well, that will have to be linked to the fight against right reformism and ultra-leftism. Was very clearly stated. That is that you can immediately understand the shift. That is the, as I said, you can now take note of the shift. When Lenin was alive, there was this dispute, open discussion, open debate. The first phase was over. Then they were in scored his victory, and it appeared now that Devorin had, and Devorin with his sympathy for Hegel or Hegelianism, emphasis on consciousness, etc., will provide a new orientation to Soviet Marxism. That was the beginning of the second phase, but it was very short-lived. And now emerged a third phase. That is, this third school emerged, Yudin and Nitin. They pointed out that both the schools are wrong, and we have to now be guided by our new understanding. Finally, a fourth phase started. This fourth phase started, one document I have already mentioned. Fourth phase started thereafter. In this fourth phase, in a number of articles, especially at that time in Soviet Union, in fact, there was an old, very respected academic journal. It was called Under the Banner of Marxism. That was the name of the journal. Very old journal. That Under the Banner of Marxism, it actually was a very popular and very respected academic journal right from the time of the that is right since the end of the revolution. That is immediately after the Russian Revolution, this journal became very, very prominent, very popular, and it was very widely read in the academic circles. Now, in this journal, a series of articles now began to be published. In Communist Academy, then Institute of Red Professors, and all such academic Marxist establishments. Now, it began to be said, and it began to be said especially after one thing, that is, in the year 1937, there was a conference convened by the Communist Academy, uh, that is 17 to 20th October in Communist Academy, 1937, 17 to 20th October 1937. In Communist Academy, a 3-day conference. This conference was actually all about the tasks of the philosophy or philosophers in Soviet Union. And just 1 year, 1 year after that, in the year 1938, a book was published. This book was actually authored by Stalin himself, but there were many others also. All these scholars, there is Nitin, then many others, Yuvin and many others, they also collaborated with him. This book was known as a short history of the Communist Party of Soviet Union, within bracket Bolshevik. In this book, uh, there was a chapter uh, exclusively devoted to uh, Marxist philosophy, or the understanding of Marxism in Soviet Union. If we take into account all these documents, that is this 1937 Communist Academy discussion, then earlier documents, if we take all of them together, then what we come across is this. By the mid 30s, by mid 30s, say by 1934, around this time, well, four principles were very clearly outlined, and these were considered as the guiding principles for study of Soviet Marxism, for understanding of Soviet Marxism. Now, what were these four guiding principles? First one is all philosophical writings, all philosophical discussions, all, say, philosophical exercises, all writings on Marxism in Soviet Union would be guided by one consideration. What is that? Practice. What is meant by practice? Practice meant whether these writings, these arguments, these thoughts, these discussions are serving the cause of Soviet socialism, are helping the cause of socialist construction. If not, they will not be tolerated. They will not be allowed. This is number one. First. Number two, very clearly it was mentioned, these would have to be partisan. There is a Russian word, partinnos. Partinnos means actually partisanship. They will. You cannot be neutral. Whatever you are writing, they must serve the cause of the party. Number two. Number three, it was pointed out that Lenin died in 1924. Now, the real successor of Lenin, so far as thought is concerned, so far as leadership is concerned, so far as ideas are concerned, that is Joseph Stalin. So, Stalin, Lenin-Stalin continuity. Stalin's writings, Stalin's speeches, Stalin's articles, they will have to be propagated. They have to be given maximum importance. They are the guidelines. This is number three. And number four, ideology. All philosophical discussions, all writings concerning Soviet Marxism, well, they have to be uh, tacked to the cause of ideology. Ideologically, whether they are acceptable or not. Ideologically means whether you are adhering to the party line. If not, these discussions are closed. They are forbidden. I will close this part of the discussion. Practically, this was the most difficult and complex part, and I know that these things are not known to you. So I will just wind up this part of the discussion by, after that, I will take, say, about 10 minutes more. That will, I think, make the whole thing understandable to all of you. Two things happened. And I'm mentioning these facts by way of illustrations. In 1931 was the year of, uh, uh, yes, 1931. That was 100 years of the death of Hegel. And in 1931, in Moscow, uh, a very big conference was held uh, on the occasion of Hegel's death centenary. And on this occasion, it was very clearly and very strictly pointed out that on the occasion of Hegel's death ceremony, you have to understand, you have to actually project this line that Hegel has nothing to do with Marxism. Hegel was actually a reactionary thinker. Lenin's understanding was completely different. Lenin's understanding was that unless you have mastered Hegel, you cannot understand Marx. This understanding of Lenin was completely distorted. So, because as I said, Devorin was a follower of Hegel. Devorin had to be uh, hounded out, and so this this was the kind of argument which was. This is one information, and another information. You will be shocked to get this information. That is Devorin, and like Devorin, some others also. Some of them belong to the school of liquidationists also. Not all, but some of them. They were in very much. They all eventually admitted, they confessed that yes, we have made mistakes. We have done wrong. We have done injustice to our party. And Stalin has corrected us. Therefore, we admit our mistakes. Why I am saying this? I'm saying this because these people who openly confessed, who openly admitted that yes, we have done wrong, well, they survived in Soviet Union. Till there, they died natural death. But there were many others. I'm not mentioning their name because the names are not familiar to you. Many others who belong to the school of Devorin, who belong to the school of liquidationists. They were arrested and executed around the year 1937, 1938. Some of you, I do not know how many of you are familiar with these things. That in the Soviet Union in 1937, 1938, there took place a big purge. And in that purge, anybody who was believed to be, who was uh, believed to be a suspect in the sense that he is not following the party line. Therefore, they were arrested and executed. Bukharin was executed. Many others were executed. And some of the leading Soviet philosophers who did not say confess like, say, Devorin, they were all arrested and executed. So, I think now you can understand why I say that initially the Soviet Marxism witnessed debates, discussions, many other things. But by the beginning of the 1930s, I have already mentioned, now I have explained the whole thing. By the beginning of the 1930s, entire Soviet Marxism, it became ossified. Ossified in the sense it lost its strength, it lost its value, it became a mechanical, stereotype kind of understanding, one single unilinear homogeneous understanding that is Soviet Marxism means the Marxism as defined by the Soviet Communist Party. There can be no other point of difference. And very interestingly, if one say, then the Second World War came and nothing happened. Then after the war, Stalin died in 1953. Soviet Union survived till the year 1991. But if one looks into the books on Marxism in Soviet Union, there were some exceptions of it, but they were very few. But majority of the books which came out from Soviet Union. In fact, we were students in those days. I'm talking of the 1960s, 1970s, beginning of the 1980s. So for 3 decades, almost for 30 years, the kind of books on Marxism that used to come out from Soviet Union, if one reads those books, you will find one very interesting feature. So many books, so many texts, so many writings on Marxism being published from Soviet Union, with a few exceptions. All the books are reflective of one single style, style, same understanding, same thing, repetition, nothing new. Same thing is being dished out by different scholars. And everywhere, the reference is always given to, say, the official position of the Soviet Communist. Now, I come to a very brief account of Western Marxism. What is Western Marxism? Western Marxism, actually, this is a term which was used by a French scholar around the year 1950, 55, 57. Yes. Yes. Uh, just a minute. Here, yeah. His name is 1955. 1955, a French scholar, French Marxist, very famous French Marxist, Merleau-Ponty. Merleau-Ponty, in the year 1955, he first used the expression Western Marxism in order to differentiate Western Marxism in all respects from Soviet Marxism. And this position was then reflected, this understanding was reflected uh, by Perry Anderson in his very famous text, Considerations on Western Marxism in 1976. Many other writers. There is one scholar, a Russian scholar, M. Osipova. Osipova, in 1992, she actually came out with an article, Western Marxism. It was published in Sociological Research, volume 31, number 3, 1992. So all of them, more or less, have tried to focus on two things. I'm giving you a summary. What is that? That is Western Marxism. Why it is called Western Marxism? Because it emerged in Central Europe, mainly in Germany, to a large extent in Italy, to some extent in Hungary. And they pointed out that Western Marxism is a kind of understanding which is different from Soviet Marxism in two, at least in two aspects. One is Western Marxism. It tries to understand Marxism primarily with reference to its uh, German philosophical roots. That is the tradition of idealism, the tradition of Kant, the tradition of Hegel, and tradition of Marx. They argue Marx cannot be understood without reference to the German classical philosophical tradition, which Soviet Marxism completely rejects. They point out that yes, we, we appreciate the importance of matter, but for us, what is most important is consciousness, the intervening role of man, the intervening role of consciousness. Not that we uh, we are idealists, not that, but they actually tried to provide a materialist understanding of Hegel, a materialist understanding of German classical philosophy, and thereby they pointed out that Marx also did the same thing. Marx you cannot understand without reference to Hegel. Marx picked up lots of clues from Hegel. So if you reject Hegel, if you reject classical philosophy, German classical philosophy, and if you try to reduce Marxism to a sort of a kind of dogmas and the kind of understanding that Soviet Marxism tried to defend, that is not Marxism. So this is, and Western Marxism. In fact, there is one scholar, Jacobi. He very rightly has pointed out that Western Marxism actually is an expression of defeat. Defeat on two fronts. On one can say Western Marxism is a response to two types of defeat. Why two types of defeat? Defeat on two fronts. One was Western Marxism emerged as a critique of Soviet Marxism, as an alternative to Soviet Marxism. Soviet Marxism, reduction of Marxism to a set of dogmas, that was rejected by them. And the exponents of Western Marxism, they were very seriously concerned about the fate of Soviet Marxism. That Russian Revolution began with a great promise, but ultimately, the kind of order which it built up, it became highly authoritarian. It rejected the notion of freedom. It rejected the notion of democracy. And it completely betrayed the spirit of Marx. That is one. And that was first defeat. And the second defeat was, they pointed out, that that is, Jacobi points out, that Western Marxism believed, strongly believed, that the Russian Revolution would be repeated in other parts of Europe. But this did not happen. The aftermath of Russian Revolution witnessed the victory of fascism across Europe, an ideology which completely rejects Marxism. So Western Marxism actually tried to understand questions which were never addressed by Soviet Marxism. What were the questions they tried to address? And I will end up by just pointing out these issues, and we will now understand that why Western Marxism and Soviet Marxism, well, uh, why they are different. What were the questions that they tried to? The question that they tried to raise was this. They tried to address, they tried to understand was this. Why fascism emerged in Europe? Frankfurt School, for example, which is very much belongs to the legacy of Western Marxism. Frankfurt School strongly tried to address this question. How fascism took hold of our consciousness. How, how is it that sane human beings, normal human beings, are attracted toward this violent ideology? So how fascism manipulates your consciousness? How fascism takes hold of your consciousness? This is one question. Second, what is real democracy? Real democracy, Karl Korsch, for example, focused on this point. That is, democracy has to come from below. Democracy has to emerge spontaneously. Democracy has to emerge the democracy has to manifest itself in the form of grassroots democracy. That is, the masses themselves will spontaneously play their role in the building of society. This is one question. Third question, emphasis on superstructure. Superstructure means ideology, culture, consciousness. Gramsci, for example, focused on this question, the issue of hegemony, the issue of, say, culture, the issue of counter-hegemony. That is, if socialism has to be built up, if fascism has to be fought, then it is not, it will not be, it will not happen in the street. Street battles will not solve this problem. It is a battle of consciousness. How the consciousness, the evil consciousness, that has been generated by fascism can be countered by an alternative kind of consciousness, revolutionary consciousness. And fourth, that is also, you can understand epistemologically and ontologically, they point out, yes, we have to understand the importance of subject and subjectivity. Matter is important, of course, but matter cannot be understood without reference to or without emphasizing the role of consciousness. So I end up by saying, as I said, at the end, I will, in the third part, I will now answer your question, that is conflict or cooperation. Cooperation was out of question. And Soviet Marxism, they rejected Frankfurt School. They said that Frankfurt School is a reactionary school. Because you can understand that the two orientations are completely different. They were very critical of many of the Western Marxists. Karl Korsch, for example, was completely rejected by Soviet Marxism because Korsch very strongly condemned the kind of Marxism that flourished in Soviet Union. So far as Lukács is concerned, Georg Lukács, he was a very important figure in Western Marxism. So far as Lukács is concerned, well, Soviet Marxism never took a very positive attitude towards Lukács. Rosa Luxemburg was never accepted as a figure, as an important figure in Soviet Marxism. So it was all along a relation of conflict, very little of cooperation. Although initially, and with that I will stop, initially, in the early 20s, and this is also very interesting information, one scholar, almost forgotten, his name was David Ryazanov. David Ryazanov actually was picked up by Lenin in the early 20s, and he was given the responsibility of establishing the Marx Engels Institute in Moscow. He was a versatile scholar and was deeply respected internationally by the Marx scholars. So Ryazanov was invited by Lenin, and Ryazanov eventually accepted the responsibility. And in those days, in the early 20s, Frankfurt School was established, Institute of Social Research, as it came to be known. It was established in the year 1923. And initially, David Ryazanov entered into a very interesting collaboration with the Frankfurt School. That is, Soviet Marxism initially in the early years entered into a collaboration with one of the main institutions representing Western Marxism. That was early 20s where cooperation took place. But thereafter, after 1928, as the academic scenario changed, the relation between Frankfurt School and Ryazanov Marx Engels Institute, that also eventually came to an end. And what is most shocking is that by 1931, as things were changing, Ryazanov was actually removed from the Marx Engels Institute, and he was also ultimately executed uh, by 1937, 1938, because he was considered as a person who is too liberal, who is too scholarly, and the kind of research that he's actually engaged in will not serve the cause of the party. So that is more or less the story of this uh, relation between Soviet Marxism and Western Marxism. And with that, I stop. We will have still about 10-15 minutes time. So you are absolutely free to ask me any question. I know that this is a very complex story. Many things are not known to you. And it is very difficult to say do justice to these things, say within say about 1 hour or 15 minutes. So it should take it takes hours to go in story, but I refrain from proceeding any further. So thank you very much. So now questions.
Thank you, sir, for this. Thank you, sir, for this wonderful lecture. It's really very exciting, and we learned a new perspective. So thank you, sir. Now we will begin our question answer session. Who joined in the Google Meet, they can unmute themselves and ask the questions, or they can otherwise type the question in the chat box. I will say the questions for sir. We have already one question by Shorodi. Shorodi raised his hand. Please unmute yourself and ask the question directly, sir.
Thank you. Am I audible?
Yes, yes, you are audible. So Shorodip is very much audible. Yes.
Sir, it's been a long time since I've heard you, but this
Yes,
time
yes,
online.
yes,
It
yes, yes,
brought
yes.
back very fond memories, sir. Thank you very much
Thank you,
for
thank
this.
you.
Yes, sir. Sir, well, as your student, sir, I have been following Marxism for so many years. And one of the first books that I had read was one edited by you, Rutin Platform, if you
Yes,
remember.
yes, 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 yes.
Long time back, about
Long, long
15
time
years
back.
back, I had read it.
Right,
Yeah.
right, right, right.
Sir, I was reminded of a lot of things. So I have one comment, and that is, and one comment, and followed by two questions. You may choose any of the one questions to answer, or you may answer both. First
Yes.
is, sir, this the monothetic or the this monolithic Marxist idea that we find Marxism, Leninism, and Stalin, Joseph Stalin thought that we find emerging. That was not just something which we saw in science and philosophy, but I may add here, this was also something which impacted Soviet culture and especially Soviet music, sir.
Mm-hmm.
Like for example, Dmitri Shostakovich.
Yes.
I'm sure you're aware of him. He was one of the
Yeah.
finest
Yes,
composers, Russian
yes, yes,
composers.
yes.
Yes, and when he was working under Stalin in that particular time, he was repeatedly criticized of being too formal in his approach.
Mm-hmm.
Right, he was criticized of formalism. His
Right.
music was criticized of having too much structure and no revolutionary content, and he had to go through a lot. So this was, I believe, an entire aspect of Soviet life under Stalin, especially since the purges began in the late 1930s. So I am my question with this regard is. What do you think after 1956, the kind of changes in Soviet Marxism that came about because of de-Stalinization, came to the forefront because of de-Stalinization, and especially during the Brezhnev period, which is considered as the most stable period of Soviet history. What about the developments, or what about the party line and its impact on culture and science and philosophy after 1956? That is my first question. Whether at all it brought Soviet Marxism closer to Western Marxism at all. I don't know. I definitely know about Glasnost and Perestroika. But what about from 1956 to say 1985? That is my first question. And second is, sir, with regard to Western Marxism, when I was hearing you, I was reminded of the Prague Spring, 1968, and the spontaneous revolution and the way it was curbed, and the Hungarian Revolution, 1956, if I'm not mistaken. The idea was definitely of spontaneity, something that was brought forward by Laclau and Mouffe. Of post-Marxism, post-Marxist ideas. So these happened much later, but the end that the Frankfurt School started was right after the rise of the Nazis and the fascists. That is, from 1920s onwards. They came up as a criticism of Nazism and fascism. Now, sir, given the rise of neoconservatism in Europe today, do you think there can be a resurgence of such ideas, if not, the leftists ever coming to power in Europe again? But do you think there is a resurgence possible of the ideas which were preached by, by the Frankfurt School, by Spanish communists or Italian communists, Lucio Coletti and others, Togliatti and others? These are my two questions, sir. Thank you. Thank
So
you
these,
for this lecture.
These are very fascinating questions, and
Thank you, sir.
I feel really tempted to respond to your question, but I must admit, and Shorodip will very well understand that actually doing justice to your two questions, it will take at least 1 hour.
Yes,
So
yes, I
I
know.
cannot do that. But I will very briefly respond to your
Absolutely, sir. Thank you, sir.
the first one is actually the period, very important period, that is 1956 to say around 1962 when Khrushchev was ousted and Brezhnev then came to
Yes,
power.
sir. That's
So
963. Yes, sir.
63, 63, yes.
Yeah.
Now, during this time, actually, now many new reports and information is available. It is true that definite attempts were being made and they succeeded also to reorient the Soviet academic establishment. And lots of new people, with new ideas. There is one book written by, I have forgotten, in fact, I reviewed that book in Economic and Political Weekly long back. Uh, I have forgotten the details, but the historian's name was Pankratova, Pan Kratova. Pankratova, she was a member of the Soviet historical establishment, that is
Okay.
Academy of, I think Academy of Sciences, history division. So
Mhm.
she there actually mentioned a lot of episodes which took place uh, when Khrushchev came to power after the Stalinization. So things started happening there. But then, as you know, after Brezhnev came to power, again everything, the clock was again put back
Sort
to
of
speed.
turn back.
Yeah, yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
sir.
yeah. It was a turnaround. This is one thing, and the and actually this is the thing that started with gusto, say after Gorbachev came to power, during the period of that is perestroika and glasnost. Lots of things started happening, but it was already too late. That is a different story. And
Mhm.
so far as your second question is concerned, yes, uh, uh, Frankfurt School, resurgence of Italian Marxism, etc. These theoretically, philosophically, perhaps possible. But the problem is, all these things happen uh, in those days, even in the Frankfurt School. It is true that those who were the exponents of Frankfurt School, they were not, say, very strong partisans. I don't know, for example, he was not a partisan. But there were others associated with the Frankfurt School in one way or other. They had very strong party connections. Lukács himself, in fact, was actively at one time in those days
Yes, sir. Yes.
involved in the Frankfurt. But the problem today is the question that you have very rightly raised. The problem today is who will do it? There is no, as such, Communist Party. There are so many splits. The very important role in those days, for example, the role played by Italian Communist Party, the role played by the French Communist Party, they
Yes,
actually
sir.
they actually popularized the ideas of Gramsci, Togliatti, many others, Althusser, and many others. Now all these things are
Mm.
gone. So if since there is a political vacuum, I do not know how one thing may be explored, but I have no idea of how things are happening in the academic world in Europe now. That is, individuals, say academics, say select academic circles, they are perhaps trying to explore these ideas, explore these things. I give you just one very interesting information. That is, perhaps there is one group, historical materialism. Historical materialism is a group operating from London, and it has very
Yes,
good
sir.
network. And historical materialism has connection with one very good publisher in London. It is called Brill. So Brill brings out lots of books, and the books are very expensive. For,
Mhm.
for us, it is very difficult to
The
get.
Terry Eagleton was also a part of this, I believe.
Yes, you are right. Yeah, yes,
Mhm.
many of them, Eagleton, Frederick Jensen, many others.
Mhm.
So,
Yes.
but as I find it now, these are the scholars, these writers. They were mainly involved in their individual, say, individual projects, individual initiatives. So, how far they can go in resisting or withstanding the kind of right that is emerging across Europe and the world, I am I do not find as such any sign of it. That is
That
my
is true.
my
Very
experience.
true.
Anyway, thank
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
you.
Now we'll take some questions from our chat box. Rakhi asked a question. She's asking that to what extent can we consider the epistemological rupture between Western Marxism and Soviet Marxism a product of class configuration within the intellectual field itself, wherein the former's retreat into cultural and philosophical is not merely resistance to Stalinist orthodoxy, but also a symptom of its increasing detachment from proletarian praxis. Is Western Marxism then inevitably complicit in diplomatizing revolution into critique?
No, the actually this is not wholly true, because actually this kind of question you are rightly asking, because I could not elaborately discuss Western Marxism. Western Marxism also, I should have mentioned it. That was my fault actually. That Western Marxism also, like Soviet Marxism, is not a homogeneous thing. Within Western Marxism, there are many shades of it. For instance, two persons, Gramsci and Lukács, they were very much partisans, very strongly oriented towards the proletariat, very strongly active in their struggles. But you cannot equate them with Frankfurt School. In Frankfurt School, Horkheimer or I don't know, they were mainly academics. Their activities were also confined primarily, but academic. But I will not say that politically neutral. They were not at all politically neutral. They were very strongly inclined towards understanding of fascism. Therefore, I think it would be a bit oversimplification if we say that those who were Western Marxists, they were not inclined towards any class position, or they were somewhat detached from the masses. Not true. That is not true. Karl Korsch, for example. Karl Korsch, he was actually hounded out of the German Communist Party, but he was a very active, not only member of the German Communist Party till 1923-24. In fact, he was expelled, I think, by the end of 1920s. I have forgotten the year, maybe 27, 28 around this time. He was actually hounded out of the German Communist Party because his position did not correspond to the official position of the Communist Party of Germany. That was the problem. Before we accuse Western Marxism of, say, having betrayed the cause of Marxism, we must also understand the kind of situation that they had to face uh, vis-a-vis the Soviet Communist Party. Soviet Communist Party did not spare anyone who disagreed with the official Soviet. So that has to be uh, appreciated and that has to be understood.
Thank you, sir.
Mhm.
Uh, Shubhranil, you can unmute yourself and ask your question. We will take only more two questions because of the time constraints. Shubhranil, you can unmute yourself and ask the question.
Am I audible?
Yes, yes,
Yes.
you are audible. Very much
Uh,
audible. Yes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, respected sir. It is actually as a student of Jadavpur University and as a student of Professor Parthopratim Bosu, I often find myself, I actually blame myself that I could not sit at your feet and learn at one point of time. I'm fairly very young, but it's really been really enlightening to listen to you and truly grateful to you, sir. Actually, I'll be as brief as possible. I actually had two questions. One was regarding the role of Stalin
Mhm.
in this entire project, where
Mhm.
often as suppose I am, as an average layman, many a times Stalin is this kind of a figure who is blamed for being paranoid or power hungry, and he quashes all resistance and opposition within the Soviet Union to himself and all of that. Is it where those motivations real? I think I were those motivations too simplistic to attribute to Stalin in the first place. I
Mhm.
think the Stalin phenomenon sometimes confounds me and many others. What actually drove Stalin to pursue those actions? So Stalin has very difficult relationships with many a stalwart like figures, for example, like Maxim Gorky,
Mhm.
and for with Rokovorsky and Tukhachevsky, the former of whom the Soviet generals, the
Mhm.
former of whom he has executed, and the latter whom he has sent to the Gulag, but then brought
Right,
back
right, right.
in the wake of Operation Barbarossa. So
Mhm.
clear that Stalin doesn't actively destroy everyone around him, but his actions, as you so eloquently pointed out, his actions actually lead to the suppression of the various strands of uh, uh, reading and thinking about Marxism in the Soviet Union. But what was his motivation? Because I find his motivation to be sometimes very mysterious. Was it just power, or was it just paranoia? It was something more complex. If you could shed some light on that. And one more thing, sir, when we talk about Marxism in Europe, uh, I find the figure of Mussolini as being particularly interesting because prior to his turn into a fascist, he had certain revolutionary credentials. So, if possible, could you just explore that? Could you just help me walk through that? As in, what was Mussolini and what was his impact on politics in Europe before and after his turn into a full blown fascist? Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Okay, these two questions are very pertinent question, but I would primarily focus on your first question because the second question actually it's a somewhat deviation from the kind of theme that we are discussing. Anyway, very briefly, I will try to respond to your second question. So, what as your first question is concerned, yes, this is a very complex phenomenon. That is a Stalin phenomenon. Uh, I think what needs to be specially emphasized in regard to Stalin, and which unfortunately is not done because very few writings are available now. Nowadays, some books have come out. That is, one is Stalin as say as a leader of the Soviet Communist Party. Stalin as a say then during the Second World War, his role as the leader of the Soviet Union. That is one issue, and some writings are available in regard to his cycle, that is his mental makeup of Stalin. So these studies are available, but one study that is not very much available on Stalin is Stalin's as a philosopher, Stalin's theoretical understanding of Marxism. And so far as Stalin's theoretical understanding of Marxism, there are just one or two books, as a few writing, which actually show, but I'm not in a position now to elaborate this point because time constraint is a major factor. That is, philosophically, this whole notion of Lenin-Stalin continuity thesis that can be addressed properly if one looks into Lenin's philosophical position and Stalin's philosophical position in regard to Marxism. I think that actually will, to a large extent, uh, uh, answer your question. It is not that is that is. It may be my mental makeup. It may be my power hungry sort of attitude, maybe, but underlying all these things, which unknowingly perhaps shaped my consciousness, shaped my psyche, is my philosophical position. Philosophically, ontologically, uh, Stalin's position, well, it was, I would say that Lenin's position and Stalin's position, absolutely. It was a problem with, say, Bukharin also. Bukharin initially took up a position, initially, in his early writings, ABC of historical materialism, of historical materialism, I think a kind of manual. Bukharin's position was very much, very mechanical, very stereotyped. Then eventually there was a shift in Bukharin's position, complete shift, especially in his last writings when he was in prison, writings which have now come up. Complete shift. Even Trotsky's philosophical notebooks, which are not very easily accessible, uh, his philosophical position. If you compare these four figures, for example, Lenin, Stalin, Trotsky, and Bukharin, their four philosophical position, I think you will get the answer to your question. This is my one. And so far as Mussolini is concerned, yes, Mussolini at one time was very strongly attached to the Socialist Party, but I think this that his differences actually started cropping up when the communists they started raising their heads, when the presence of the communists eventually began to be strongly evident, because Socialist Party was losing its ground in its ideological conflict with the Communist Party, just at the time when the First World War was going on. Maybe this is one of the reasons that uh, Mussolini gradually began to realize that Socialist Party is not the place where he will be able to survive. And naturally, the question of joining the communists also, that is not possible. So he is detaching himself from his association with the Socialist Party and trying to develop his own political establishment. Maybe this is one of the reasons.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir, for joining us today. We will end our session here. Thank you, sir, for joining us. Thank you for sharing your wonderful thoughts and intellectual deeper with us. Thank you, sir, once again for joining us today in this evening. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank,
From my part also, a very big thank you to all of you, all the participants. Thank you.
thank you, sir.